So just by way of brief introduction, I'm Mike Thompson. I am a director of leadership development and learning at a company called Cepheid. It's a healthcare company in the Bay Area. Only been there for about 7 months, but I've been working in the leadership development field, thanks in part to our two presenters today who sort of got me started on this journey. And I'll tell you more about that for the better part of the last 20 years. In the strengths area is something that I've been passionate about ever since my experience with Toyota back in the day, as they say. So that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Scott Weimer to lead us through our wellness activity for the evening.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure doing this. And as Mike said to some of the people who were first on the call, we've known each other since 2002 and have had a great professional and personal relationship, both on and off the tennis court ever since. We start every meeting with a wellness moment. The Wellness Committee is comprised of a couple of authors, Jacqueline Ashley and Sherry Betts, who are working on their first and second books on the topic, as well as Garrison and Giuseppe and me. And today's wellness activity, apropos of the event, will focus on strengths. So what we're going to do in a few moments is Sherry's going to put us into breakout groups with 2 people per room. And so what you will do is one person will go first and talk about a time when you were at your best, when you were firing on all cylinders and things were going great. It could be something in your personal life or your professional life, and just talk about what happened, what you were doing, who was there, how it felt. And then at the end of a few minutes, the whole thing will be 10 minutes, so 5 minutes per person. At the end of talking about it, the other person will then reflect back, what strengths or positive qualities did you hear when the person was talking? So let's say Mike and I were doing it. Mike would go first and he'd talk about the time he climbed Mount Everest, and he would describe it in vivid detail. And then I would reflect back what specific strengths I heard in his story. And then we'd switch roles and I'd talk about an accomplishment of mine and he would reflect my strengths. So let's do it.
And just to clarify, it was actually Mount Fuji, not Mount Everest. But
you did climb Mount Fuji?
I did, but they're all pretty high. They're all pretty high. Anyway.
Okay, and how long are we having for breakout rooms?
let's say 10 minutes. So plan on total 5 minutes per person.
Okay, perfect. And I'll give you a halfway mark with warning as well, so you know.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay, thanks, Sherry.
Rooms are ready. Okay.
All right.
They were ready. Someone just left, so we'll do that. Okay, and here we go.
Did you put question in the chat? Yep, you did.
I can broadcast it too, Scott. Yeah, now the rooms are officially closed. Everybody's back.
Great.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Before we pass it on, we're going to do one final thing where we put something in the chat. So if everybody could put in the chat, very briefly, one strength of yours, and in a sentence or less, one thing you learned. And don't hit send. Take about 40 seconds right now to type something. And at the end of 40 seconds, I'll say go, and then you can hit send.
Can we hit send?
And 3, 2, 1, send.
All right.
Okay,
We good, Scott?
we are good.
All right. Thank you, folks. Thank you for the activity. Good, nice way to segment us into the session. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and good long friend, Karen Accomando. So Karen, just by way of brief introduction, is a corporate trainer at Toyota. She has been there for over 22 years, and I think 3 months to be precise. I met her years ago as an intern, a very unusual intern because I was 45 at the time. And I was a university professor teaching Japanese economics, actually in Japan, and came all the way over to Southern California and spent 9 weeks at the University of Toyota working with her and Mike Morrison, who we'll meet soon. But amongst a number of great experiences I had during that summer of 2001, I got a lot of exposure to some really great practices around development, around leadership, learned about the Toyota Way, which is a model for organizational performance and improvement that stands today with lots of companies all over the world. And on top of all of that, I got to get exposed to the strengths model and the StrengthsFinder, which Karen will talk you through. So Karen has her undergraduate degree from UCLA. Do I have that right, Karen? UCLA?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And her master's degree in business administration from the Graziadio School at Pepperdine University. So it's my pleasure, and please welcome with me Karen Accomando. So Karen.
Hi, everybody. I guess I should ask, is anybody from the school on the other side of town? I guess it's okay that I'm...
Other than Mike Morrison, you mean?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I know Scott's a UCLA graduate, so I don't know if anyone else goes to that other school.
Yeah.
I did not. I did not, by the way. So Karen, get us started with a little bit of context here. So, in back in the day, in 2001, we first met. There was some sort of momentum that was building around the whole strengths philosophy and the strengths movement, if you will.
Yeah.
So can you provide us with, for those hopefully who, and maybe there aren't too many who are not familiar with the whole strengths philosophy, maybe just give us a background of some of the key players in that movement and some of the work that was done, the pioneering work, which still goes today.
Yeah. Well, so I think there is a poll ready. Now, I'm not used to working with Zoom. We use Teams at Toyota, so this is all new for me. And I think we have a poll for this first, right? Just to start off, what I'd like to find out is, are you familiar with strengths? So let's see if the poll is where, oh yes, there we go. I can answer that myself. Excellent.
I hope I know the answer for you at least.
Yeah, I hope so too. All right, I guess we'll be able, so do we see this result immediately, see where we're at?
Yeah, I'm just letting the answers come in. We've got 90%, 93% participation. Let's go for 100%, 31 to 33, 32. I need one more person, and maybe that's me. So I guess that I don't know. Right, here we go.
Technology is amazing. All right, so nearly all of you are pretty familiar with strengths. So for those of you that don't know that much about the history, maybe I can add some context, which is one of the strengths actually, but some probably, you know, the strengths movement really started like 6 decades ago with Dr. Don Clifton, who was a professor at the University of Nebraska at the time. He was studying what makes people successful, was really what he was working on there. And then what he found, like many of us have experienced at school and at work, that we often tend to focus on the deficits of what's wrong, what are the weaknesses, what's not working, right? What's the problem? And so based on those experiences, he posed this really simple question, which was, what if we studied what was right with people instead of what's wrong with people? So I think many of you know that Don is considered to be the grandfather of positive psychology, which has been really a hot topic over the last 20 years. And we've seen in the last decade a lot of books around positive psychology and happiness studies and things like that. And Dr. Mike, who you'll meet in a moment, my former boss, is a great visionary, and he really exposed us to a lot of this positive psychology thinking when it was really in its infancy around 2000. And so, as I said, big movement over the last decade. But and so Don is really also the father of the strengths movement. So he bought the Gallup organization in like the 80s, I think, and then we all probably know that that the Gallup organization measures everything. Now, many of you have heard of the Gallup poll, right? Everybody? Yeah, so we all know they measure everything. So he developed this StrengthsFinder assessment around 1999. And so about that same time, he had a couple of gentlemen working for him, some young gentlemen, Marcus Buckingham, many of you might know Marcus, and Kurt Kaufman, and they were doing a lot of research. And they published a book called First Break All the Rules. And so that was really considered pretty groundbreaking at the time. So it was about what the great most successful managers do, which was a little bit different than what other managers were doing. And then a couple of years later, Marcus and Don Clifton published a book called Now Discover Your Strengths. And that's when the world really got to know about StrengthsFinder, got introduced to the 34 themes of strengths in the book. And then a number of years later, 2007, Don's grandson, Tom Rath, they took Now Discover Your Strengths, and he kind of updated it, and they called it StrengthsFinder 2.0. And both of those books include, for any of you who have not taken the assessment, both of those books include a code that you can use one time to take the StrengthsFinder assessment. So the assessment is usually referred to as the StrengthsFinder, but a couple of years ago, Gallup renamed it CliftonStrengths in honor of Don Clifton, who has since passed away. And so the assessment measures 34 strengths, and the report generally generates your top 5 strengths. So that's a bit of background. You know, in fact, let me have everybody do to kind of demonstrate for that 12% that is not familiar. If everybody could please pick up a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, Post-it note, whatever you have nearby. And I want you to take that pen and put it in your dominant hand and just write your name. Sign your name with your dominant hand. And then tell me whether you put it in the chat or if you want to just open up your mic and speak out loud. What did that feel like? What were words you described the process of signing your name with your regular dominant hand? What did that feel like?
Powerful.
What was the
powerful?
Word? Powerful. Excellent. All right. Probably I'm thinking some of you are thinking it was easy, effortless, maybe unconscious, don't have to think about it, natural, right? So some of you are nodding. So, okay, that's what a strength should feel like, right? A strength is a natural pattern of thoughts, behaviors that are pretty effortless for you. And a strength should make you feel strong, should be energizing, right? It's something you're just great at it and you know it. So of course, we'll do the opposite. Now put the pen in the other hand. And once again, sign your name. And now, see, it's taking a little longer this time. So again, what are some words you'd use to describe what that felt like?
Karen, we have coming in the chat, we've got awkward, we've got uncomfortable, we've got challenge,
Yeah, it's messy.
we've got like a chore,
Yes, it's embarrassing.
we've got embarrassing,
All right, yeah, it's right. It was awkward. It's slower,
disjointed.
disjointed, messy, difficult. Takes much more of your focus, right? That's an example of what a non-strength might feel like, right? So again, in the chat, because I don't think we have this one in the poll, but would you put in the chat whether or not you have taken the StrengthsFinder or the CliftonStrengths assessment? Have you taken the All right, so we got some yeses. All right, so a whole bunch of you. Well, that's going to make things so much easier. Okay, there's one no, a couple of no's. All right. So somebody's taken StrengthsFinder and Standout. So for those of you that know Marcus Buckingham, who has since left Gallup, he started the Marcus Buckingham companies. You guys probably know that. So that's kind of the quick history of StrengthsFinder.
Great, and Karen, could you also share this this new tidbit that I learned when we spoke a few weeks ago about the guy whose name is associated with the one of the more recent versions of that, the 2.0 version?
Oh, Tom Rath?
Yeah.
Well, so Tom is Don Clifton's grandson. So Don Clifton has 2 children, Jim Clifton, who is the CEO of Gallup at the moment, and then Connie Rath. Connie Clifton married a gentleman named Rath, right? So, and then their son is Tom. And back when we were involved with Gallup, Tom was actually in college, and he was very introverted, very quiet, very shy. I didn't know that he had any interest in getting into the business. And then it was really interesting all of a sudden, right, to find out that he was a published author, and now he's, a very spectacular speaker, has written a lot of books that many of you might have Eat, Sleep, Move was another really big bestseller for him. But yeah, he took Now Discover Your Strengths, kind of updated it, and named it StrengthsFinder 2.0. Yeah, and it's been a bestseller ever since 2007.
Yeah, great. Well, good. Thanks, Karen. That background's helpful. And now I think what most folks are waiting to hear is to hear about the journey that you and thousands of others at Toyota went through around the strengths. So I wonder if you could talk with us about, what Toyota did with the whole strengths work, and what were some of the successes that you saw with embracing that approach to work and effectiveness and happiness and all of those things.
So what had happened many of you might remember in the 90s, one of the things that became really in vogue kind of were corporate universities. And that's what we did at Toyota as well. And that's when I joined Toyota, right when they formed the University of Toyota. So a way of centralizing all the training throughout the organization and kind of standardize all the programs that everybody was taking. And so the University of Toyota was divided into 2 colleges. So we had dealer training and development, and we had associate training or team member development. That's where I was hired by Dr. Mike, who you're going to meet in a moment. So Dr. Mike was our first dean of the associate education side college of the university. And so Mike exposed us all to First Break All the Rules, Now Discover Your Strengths, and the StrengthsFinder. And so Mike was really the person that brought them in with us and to develop a program. So we developed 2 programs. One was called the Great Managers Program for all of our people leaders. And the other one was called the Outstanding Associates Program for those that did not have direct reports. And both of those programs required taking the StrengthsFinder. And both of those programs, but particularly the Great Managers Program, just very quickly became like our flagship program. It kind of made us sort of the hot department on campus. Like everybody wanted to come to the university and see what we, find out what we were doing. And there was a great buzz around campus about the StrengthsFinder, and as a corporate university, I think we fairly quickly became kind of a benchmark for what corporate universities ought to be like. We had a huge waiting list for the class. I mean, at one point, I think it was like 6 or 8 months to take the class. We couldn't do it fast enough. We had classes every week. We in fact even had a Gallup team member. We had an office for her with us on campus, and she spent full time just processing the assessments, the instruments, getting them ready for the next class. People loved the class. I think one of the things we found is that people love to learn about themselves. And I think until then, a lot of people maybe didn't really know what their natural talents were, maybe at work, or how to articulate what they were. So the StrengthsFinder assessment really gave them kind of names for their natural talents and abilities that they could apply at work.
Yeah.
If you walked across campus at that time, you would see almost everybody had their top 5 displayed either at their cubicles in their offices. It kind of became part of the vernacular. You know, people would say things like, "Oh, that's totally in my strength zone," or "Oh yeah, no, that's a non-strength." You know, it just became kind of part of the language. And in fact, our workshops started off with a specific icebreaker question, so we thought we might as well do that here with the breakout groups. So Sherry, are we staying in the same breakout groups, or are we?
Yeah, would you like me to, are you using your slides for this, I'm thinking?
We asked that we could. So there's a breakout question, which
Yeah.
we'll show you in just a moment. And so I'm not sure how much time. I guess it depends on how many people are in the breakout.
I think we had talked about maybe 4 or 5 in each group, because this will be short, right? Right, Karen?
Yeah, it's pretty short. I mean, you can see the question there, and the icebreaker question we had in the class was, what do you get paid to do? Right? So there's no right or wrong answers, obviously, right? In your own words, what do you get paid to do? So if we could just tell us, Sherry, how many people and how much time do you think we need?
Yeah, I think we could probably do, I guess, 5 minutes for this. I've got 4 to 5 people in a room right now.
All right, so each person like 1 minute?
Pardon me?
So each person will take like 1 minute?
Yeah, I think so. How does that sound?
Yeah, I think that should work, huh?
All right.
Okay, so
right.
Please make note of that question if you want to screenshot the screen or take a picture of it. What do you get paid to do? And I'm going to open all the rooms right now. See you in 5 minutes. I'll give you a warning as well. James, no room for you? Oh, you should be in room 4. Do you want to go to room 4? You look frozen. Oh, but your laptop's probably, yeah. Hey, Betsy, did you want to be in a room? Well, you're scheduled, or excuse me. I have you for room 1. Maybe you stepped away. Yeah, looks like Betsy may have stepped away. again.
Oh, very interesting.
Mhm.
All yours,
Hey.
Karen.
Hey, Karen, in the interest of time, I'm just doing the timekeeper check here. Could
Yeah.
we manage to skip the next breakout question? Because I think some of that's already been addressed so far.
Sure.
That sound all right?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So we all back now, Sherry?
Yes, we are all back.
All right. All right, Karen, the floor is yours again. So yeah, let's, do we want to get people to, did you want to say anything about the breakout, Karen, before we continue?
So I was going to, but I know in the interest of time, and we had some pretty interesting ones. Like we had one that said, right, listening and asking questions, which for many of us as facilitators, right, where a lot of you are nodding your head, a lot of us, that's what we do. And I think as leaders, asking questions is really an important part of leading other people. Being curious. How about maybe another one or two? Anybody want to share? I don't see anything in the chat.
One of my breakout room people said they get paid to be a catalyst.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for opening up your mic, Stacy.
A problem solver.
All right, a problem solver. Excellent. Excellent.
Strategic implementation.
Change implementation. Excellent. Thanks, Erwin. All right. Good. I think we're ready for the next question, Mike.
All right. Are we, so again, let's continue the discussion about Toyota. So,
Okay.
maybe it's time now that we kind of get into the whole strengths model, particularly. Is that where we are now?
Sure.
Yes, I believe we are.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Yeah, let's take a look. So for those few of you that are not familiar with the strengths, you probably know that there are 4 domains, right? So executing, so those are people that like to make things happen. And then there's influencing domains, people that like to take charge, speak up, make sure that other people are heard. Those that have relationship building skills, right? They build strong relationships, they hold people together, they make a team better. And then strategic thinking, the people that think about, what's possible and analyze information and help us make better decisions. And so there's a slide here with the actual 34 strengths that the rest of you are familiar with. And so for those of you that haven't taken the StrengthsFinder, here are the 34 according to Gallup in these 4 domains. Often it's interesting. Teams often will put together graphs that show who has what strengths and identify, are there any gaps? Do we have a lot of people that, do we have a certain domain that's really represented, or is there a certain domain that isn't? Yeah, it's very interesting. And as I said, people love to learn about themselves, we found. So I think that's why it resonates with people so much. People have a lot of sort of those aha experiences when they're learning about strengths and themselves.
Next slide, Karen.
Yeah. Let's take a look at what the next slide is. Thank you. Oh, let me talk about that. So one of the things I wanted to do was kind of, I think some of you are familiar with the book. There's a number of different books associated with Gallup. Soar with Your Strengths was kind of one that started it all, kind of a parable. What you're looking at here is called A Drop for Your Bucket. One of the things that really worked at Toyota that we really used a lot, there was a book called A Drop in Your Bucket, and it really has to do with recognition. And the idea was that all of us kind of have a metaphorical sort of bucket of water that we're carrying around. And during the course of the day, we can each add a drop to others' buckets by sharing something positive, something affirming, something supportive, or we can dip into others' buckets by criticism, negativity, and those kind of behaviors that kind of tear others down. So Gallup has these literal drops. That are paper, it came in different colors. And it was about recognition. So every person, regardless of level or role, was really encouraged and empowered to use these to write quick notes of appreciation to one another. And that was really widely used at Toyota as well. So if you walked around campus, you would see all these colors of drops around, hanging from people's desks.
Next slide. Yeah, I just need you to cue me, Karen.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, so this was one of the things I was going to share here was we had, of course, a lot of parents at Toyota that took the workshop, and many of them talked about how it helped them as parents. And so this book was the book really that started it all with Don Clifton, Soar with Your Strengths. And so at the very beginning of this book, there's this little parable about all of these animals in a forest, and they decide that their kids could be more successful if they form a school. So they form a school. Again, share with me, raise your hand if you are familiar with this story. Does everybody know this one? All right, okay, I'll continue then. I don't want to repeat something you're all familiar with. All right, so they decide that they want their kids to be successful, so they're going to form the school for all these animals. So there's frogs and squirrels and turtles and fish and rabbits, and they all go to school together. And the very first day of school, the rabbit goes to the running class, a little bunny rabbit, and he does great. He is way faster than any other animal. And the next period, he has the jumping class. And we all know that this is a pretty natural talent for a rabbit. He does great there. In fact, he's like #1 in his class, and he is loving school. He is loving school, right? So the very last period of the day, he has swimming class. And so the teacher tosses him into the deep end of the pool, and this rabbit nearly drowns. So the teacher grabs him by his bunny ears and pulls him out of the water and says, well, this is just terrible, and sends him off to see the school counselor because he's clearly failing at swimming. And the school counselor tells the bunny, well, you're great at running and you're the top of the class in jumping, so clearly you don't need to study those anymore. What we need to do is put you into swimming 101 and remedial swimming and practice swimming every day. So the bunny literally leaves school and just wants to throw up, right? And goes home and tells his mom and dad that, well, I actually really don't want to go to school anymore. And the parents insist, no, you have to go to school. And so the poor bunny just gets depressed, hates school, and just lives for the weekend. That might sound familiar to many people, because many of you might be familiar with another Gallup statistic about engagement at work. So that percentage has pretty much floated between 60 and 70% for the last 20 years. And with this great resignation this last year, I'm not quite sure where it's at the moment. But it's really startling, right? That probably 2/3 of the people at work are really just kind of hanging in there until the weekend. So that's one of the things that Strengths brings, right? Because it creates this energy when we're great at what we're doing and we love what we're doing. So I wanted to share that parable with you. There, oh, that's what it is. That's right. So Sherry looked it up for us. 64%, that's the current percentage of disengagement, actively disengaged at work. That really sad statistic. All right, I can't hear you.
Is it that high, Karen? Is it 64% actively disengaged?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, I mean, it is hung. I've seen it as high as the low 70s, but it's kind of hung in the 60s for like 20 years. It has not moved a whole lot, unfortunately.
That is depressing.
It is depressing, actually, isn't it? Yeah.
So I'm curious, and I don't know if it's now, Karen, or later, but obviously at Toyota they were looking intentionally, I imagine, at using the strengths movement philosophy to kind of create a different environment, right? I mean, this is I would imagine Toyota would, if they saw numbers like this, they would say, hey, we got to do something about this.
Yeah,
Was that the original intent? Kind of going back to the initial work?
Well, certainly, Toyota is a pretty engaged company anyway, but there's always this, we want people to thrive at work. I've got to say, if you have to work for a living, Toyota is really a phenomenal place. And a lot of the way the leadership thinks. So it was about people being able to be their most productive, to thrive when they're at work, to grow and develop, to enjoy their lives. Part of our vision and values at work is actually to create happiness while we are at work, right? There is not a reason that it should be mutually exclusive, work for a living or be happy, right? Why can't you do both? So this is certainly part of that. And certainly that's something Dr. Mike can address even further. But certainly one of the things we saw at Toyota using strengths were, I think for some leaders, we saw things where some leaders might start to recognize maybe some of their own gaps. Like I remember one leader in particular, she really didn't have any of those relationship building strengths. And so there were rumors that people would say, well, she's not very approachable, things like that. And there were stories that she would kind of take the long way around the edges of the building to find the restroom so that she would not have to interact with people along the way. So then she intentionally kind of found a chief of staff that actually had a lot of relationship building strengths. And so that chief of staff set up different things. Like I remember one of the things they did were kind of coffee chats. So each week she would set up this like 30-minute coffee with 5 random people from the department and this leader so that they could just chat casually. And that really started to build some momentum on the team. And then she started planning some, team building and things like that. And over the course of the year, it really started making this huge difference in team member engagement and, the loyalty and productivity and all the things that we'd like to see move upwards in an organization.
Karen, I remember vividly sitting around the table with you and Mike and other members of the university, and I'm not sure you remember, but it was my last day with you all that summer. And I remember you talking about turnover at Toyota. Yeah. Do you remember that conversation?
I don't remember the conversation, but I remember certainly turnover at Toyota, which was unbelievably low.
It was 2%. It was 2%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, granted, that was back then, and I know the Great Resignation is probably having an impact on lots of companies, maybe Toyota, but I still just remember being intrigued about 2% turnover. And I wonder if is it a leap to say that the strengths approach may have had some kind of impact, or were there other things about the culture that you think?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. And Dr. Mike, let's bring Dr. Mike into this too, because he can address some of this. But certainly the culture is a big part of it. Toyota has an amazing culture. They are very focused on team members, and so team members clearly they don't leave, right? So people stay their entire career. And I've had many colleagues that have left and then have called me back and said, "Don't go anywhere else, Karen. Stay where you are." And so. And of course, I've been here now almost 23 years. So, but it is a great place to work. But strengths, I think any organization that even thinks this way, right, that lets you explore this and helps you find a way to make sure you can bring your best self, all of who you are, to the workplace, is going to be a pretty positive culture.
And would you say that I'm intrigued by someone earlier when in the breakout they described themselves as a catalyst. Is it too much to say that maybe the strengths movement at Toyota was essentially a catalyst for some significant change, or would that be a stretch?
Oh, I mean, definitely in certain areas. I mean, there was a project that I was remembering. We have parts distribution centers all over the country. And they're enormous, right? They're like a couple 100,000 square feet, several hundred team members, and they're moving the parts from these centers to all the dealerships in their area. So in California, there's one in Ontario and one in LA and one in San Francisco, for example. And Ontario was just opening in around 2001 or so when we were really hit the ground running with strengths. And Sherry, who's kind of producing this session this evening, I've known Sherry the same amount of time because Sherry was working for Gallup at the time, and Sherry was actually on that project. And Sherry, could you tell all the rest of them some of the outcomes that we had from? So this was there was a lot of turbulence and some conflict at the beginning of this workshop, of this warehouse opening up. And so that was one of the thoughts. Maybe we can try implementing strengths there. And so Sherry, let me pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Karen. I'll just keep it very brief. What we did is Gallup, we went in, a team of us went in, and we had team sessions with all of the people on the shop floor, literally on the floor. And we all sat around tables and had sessions where we talked about strengths. Everybody took their assessment, and you could feel the engaged room. You know, they came in, they were a little apprehensive about why they were there. And once people started talking about themselves, it just shifted the whole energy. And a lot of the comments I heard was that, you know, no one really takes time to develop us unless it's something that pertains to how to do our job. And the fact that corporate really values us enough to implement something that we have or that they have in their part of the world, that they would bring it here. It's really cool. And I got a really good story, a classic story I used from this. There was one person in one of the teams I was working with who had relator. And he said, what relator means to me, relator as a strength is all about building long-lasting relationships, knowing few versus deeply versus knowing many on a surface level. And he said, what relator is to me, if I see somebody walking on the shop floor without their safety glasses on, and if I know them and they're a friend of mine, I'll tell them, hey, go put your glasses on. If I don't know him or if I don't like him, I'm not going to tell him anything. That's a really good example, but they really loved it. You just saw the energy shift and how they started working more, more cohesively together. Had some humor around just the different strengths that people had, and the stories that people shared were just so impactful that just went way beyond the workplace. It was very, very positive, at least from what I could see.
So Karen, in the interest of time, I want to make sure we give Dr. Mike enough time, but I wonder if you could just leave us with any sort of last summary or perspective on the good work that you did back at that time with the strengths. Anything that you'd want the group to know?
Well, I mean, I certainly encourage everybody, and as your children grow up, become teenagers and young adults, I mean, I do think I remember the energy when people would learn what their strengths were. People just get excited to learn about themselves, and then to start thinking about, what do I do with this? I know I can make a contribution by tapping into this, right? So, and it gives everybody common language and creates such energy. And I guess one of the things that's really an important point for me is, I mentioned that drop in the bucket and that recognition, and I also mentioned how Gallup measures everything. You all know that. So we know they measure engagement. One of the other things they measure, many of you might be familiar with some of their other tools, Q12 and so forth, but they study everything. And one of the things they studied was recognition in the workplace. And there was a statistic that really astounded me, which had to do with the last time people received recognition at work. And I don't know if anybody wants to take a guess at what the average American worker reported the last time they received recognition at work. It was actually 1 year. And we know from the Q12 that the significant time period that Gallup kind of identified was 7 days. So there's a pretty big gap between 7 days and 1 year. So just even that thought of do people have what they need? Do they know what was expected of them? And has somebody gone out of their way to help develop them, to recognize them for going an extra mile or anything like that? It really does help create a great culture. And so with that, I know Dr. Mike has a lot of things to share.
Right. And I'm just going to just add to one thing you said, Karen. I'll put this in the chat later on, but you did reference the Q12. And I know Sherry has fond memories of that. And she introduced that to our ATD group, almost 20 years ago as well. But if you haven't heard the Q12, it is a simple yet very powerful tool with 12 questions, why it's called the 212, that really speak to employee engagement. I mean, employee engagement surveys today are much longer, 60, 70, 80 questions, but these 12 questions really, really zero in on some very powerful indicators of employee engagement. So I'll drop that in the chat for your reference very soon after we get started with Dr. Mike. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, just one other thought now that we're just one really, I remember one that really astounded me back in the day. It was, of course, many of you know that Lexus is our other brand. And so there's something similar for the dealerships. They did something similar, not Q12, but one that had to do with customer engagement. And again, you're looking at, is the score high or low? But I remember that Marcus Buckingham came to share results with us. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was in dealerships where engagement was really high, the cars sold for an average of like $250 more than in the dealers that were low. And over the course of the year, that ended up in profitability of like a couple of $1 million per store. So, it can definitely impact the bottom line in a very positive way.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
I remember being astounded at that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. That makes the strong business case for this kind of work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Karen. And so, Mike, if you could come on screen, that'd be great. And while you're doing that, I'm going to provide a little bit of a brief introduction to Mr. Mike, who went to that other school on the other side of town, but he's still a great guy. Anyway, Dr. Mike Morrison is founder and president of the Leadership Workshop. This is a firm that's devoted to helping organizations grow by developing necessary leadership and culture capabilities. He's an accomplished author, speaker, consultant, and Scott, I'm told decent tennis player. I can't verify that though. Who's devoted nearly 25 years of his professional career to bringing leadership development expertise to not only individuals and families, but also organizations. And from 98 to 2008, he served as dean at the University of Toyota, where he actually founded the organization and launched a lot of this work, not only with Toyota, but globally. And a lot of other Fortune 500 companies around the globe. He has this PhD in business management and marketing from Gonzaga. If any of you are basketball fans, you should know that Gonzaga is in the Sweet 16, and they're having their game tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock Pacific, so tune in. He got his MBA from that other school on the other side of town, the University of Southern California. I'm sorry, that's right, undergraduate degree, undergraduate degree at Gonzaga, master's from USC in business, and his PhD in leadership from Claremont Graduate University. So, Mike, the digital floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Can you see my slides?
We can, sir.
All right, well, thanks, Karen. What a great setup. Karen and I got to work together for about a decade, and we had a blast. Karen, her unofficial title was cruise director. We all had, our own unique titles, and that you can see, I think, the connection there. So in my life after Toyota, I got a chance to really evolve my thinking around strengths, and that's what I'm going to share. Karen did a great setup in terms of this catalyst, particularly at a time when it was needed most in organizations, kind of redirecting our energy. But I want to share with you kind of how it's evolved for me, and I think a lot of other organizations, particularly as the world has changed. We're in a much different environment. The organization I left in 2008, Toyota is, the world has changed significantly. We've had a global financial crisis. We've had, obviously a pandemic and some of these other curveball challenges. So I just want to share with you my life history. I can do it in 30 seconds, my whole life history, 30 seconds or less. I was the first baby born at in Wayne, Nebraska, brand new hospital. It was only a town of 900. I was the first baby, had kind of a normal childhood, right? Kind of. Loved team sports. Had kind of maybe a little bit of a rebellious, teenage years like most do. Went off to college, just kind of even things out, straighten things out. realized that I like dogs more than I like people. I kind of discovered that, and also kind of discovered that I'm just, a significant introvert, but I really wanted to get married. Ended up in the car business, which was super fun. Toyota, what a great place to be for over 20 years. And then, as noted, got a chance to be a part of this global university framework for Toyota, which was really, really exciting. And now I'm a consultant. So that's me. Since this is a strengths discussion, I always like to say my top strength was humility, but I kept wanting to tell everyone. So I've changed it to authenticity, right? But here's what we know too. For the last 15 years, and I did want to mention too, I'm a huge strengths advocate, but I got to be a senior scientist at Gallup for 3 years after Toyota. I've had a chance to work with 100+ organizations globally over the last 12 years, usually around leadership, lean, or OD consultation, but it often features strengths and engagement. And those two are really connected. Certainly from a Gallup perspective. But I would love to share how my application of strengths and engagement has truly evolved over that time. The strengths movement, right, was great, came at a great time. It provides some necessary relief, right, for our imperfect selves trying to find our way in truly imperfect organizations, battered about by an imperfect world. And for a moment or two, once we got our StrengthsFinder results or our MBTI or whatever it was, for a moment or two, we got to feel like maybe we were perfect, or could experience perfectness at least momentarily. So it was a nice respite from the world of challenge. So what I'm going to do, Michael, is just do one breakout here in the interest of time. I want to make sure you guys get a lot of time for Q&A, because Mike has warned me this group loves to explore. So I want to go to the second question, because I think you really do get the strengths thing. And maybe in 1 minute per person, but 1 minute or less, I'd love you to share what you're willing to share, how a setback or failure at work brought meaning, maybe unexpectedly, and maybe it took some time, but to your work life. So share to the degree that you feel comfortable about a setback or failure that ended up bringing some meaning to your work life. So I'll turn it over to Sherry to put you in groups, and then you guys can do a quick debrief. I know Michael recommend we have a little bit of a share out just to see what a few of the groups were experiencing. So let's do that.
Okay, and just to confirm, what would be the timing for this?
Well, how many are you going to put into a group?
I have 3 to 4 right now.
No, 4 minutes.
4 minutes, perfect. Okay, 4 minutes, everyone. I'll be sending you a reminder. And here we go. All yours, Mike.
Well, Mike, did you want to capture some of the insights from the breakouts?
Yeah. So, if anybody, just maybe a couple of folks, I thought we had some really great discussion in ours, but I don't want to hog up maybe 1 or 2 folks who could share, any things that stood out for you in that conversation. Now, I did promise Mike and Karen that this was a very talkative group, so don't let me down, folks.
Sometimes getting fired or laid off is a really good thing.
Yeah, could be.
Mine was where I put my attention at work. So mine was I was on a sales call with someone, and I really wanted to get them in the program with my startup, what I work for now, startup company that helps people cut back on their drinking. And I really wanted this guy to get in the program, and I tried for like a couple hours. I was on the phone to him trying to get him into the video call and everything with doctors. And in the end, he's just like, yeah. And then after he didn't follow through. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, the amount of people that I could have been talking to and signing up when I put all this effort into this guy because I've heard his story and I wanted to do it so bad for him. So that was where I was like, okay, I need to learn where to cut off, what to put my attention to, and then I can't help everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, before I turn it back to you, Mike, I do want to just share and comment on Jonathan Chopra put in the chat. It was easy to really share earlier the things that were around what we do well, but talking about setbacks, not as easy. And I think we would probably, many of us agree with that. It is hard to talk about setbacks and failures. And the only comment, Mike, this is not something, I don't know if this is something that you're going to touch on, but it's often said we learn more from failures than successes. All right. I think when we think about our strengths and we think about our successes, it's as we saw in the handwriting exercise, it's non-conscious. We don't even think about it. It's natural, right? We don't have to put any effort into it. But boy, when we fail, what do? We beat ourselves up. We overanalyze what went wrong. We come up with plans to make sure it doesn't happen again. So from a learning perspective, that could be very, very powerful. But as I think, Mike, and Karen, the strengths movement kind of almost didn't encourage us to think about those things, right? It was just, hey, just play to your strengths and don't worry about those weaknesses. So be curious to know if that's something that you've seen in your thinking, Mike, that's evolved over the last couple of decades.
Sure, that's a great tee up, Michael. If we were to look from this first breakout question, which we didn't get the answer, but it's leveraging a core strength. You guys know that we've had a chance to do it. Feels great, feels natural, positive. It's writing with our right hand, but nothing gets our attention like failure. And I always ask the question, which breakout might reveal more about not necessarily your strengths, but your character. And obviously it's meaning from failure. And the positive psychology movement has really kind of helped us see how resilient, how amazingly resiliently people are in terms of dealing with loss and such. So strengths are great, right? They can facilitate near perfect performance in activity. Nothing feels better. It's promoted by positive psychology and now a major pillar in the employee development process, right? But how about the other side of strengths? Kind of what we just experienced. How about the other side of strengths? While this near perfect performance feels great, we are often called into situations and challenges that stretch us beyond our natural talents. And if we can only hang on to our natural strengths, right, we're going to be at risk. So it reminds me of it. I love the story of the Wizard of Oz, right? Here, the leader is a 12-year-old girl from a farm in Kansas in a blue gingham dress. That's our leader, right? And she has these 3 dysfunctional friends, and they go on this journey. So here it is, right? Young Dorothy, Gail, and her dog Toto are swept away by a tornado from their Kansas farm, and they end up in this magical land of Oz. And she embarks on this quest with her 3 new friends to see the wizard, who can return, hopefully, her back to her home and actually fulfill the other wishes of her 3 companions for a brain, a heart, and courage. But if you think about it, the good witch didn't say, follow your strengths. She didn't say, follow your strengths. And at that point, a 12-year-old girl probably didn't have a real sense of what those were. She said, follow the yellow brick road, right? She says, it'll take you to the wizard. Maybe he can help you. I'm not sure, but I can't tell you much more. But you're going to have to take this journey. You're going to have to learn your way. And I love this because the result was these imperfect people in an imperfect world like us, right, are battling evil witches and monkeys. And they're finding their way. And ultimately, they get home. They get their wish and they get home. But it's not easy. It's a true journey. And I'm sure each of you has your own Wizard of Oz experience. But if you think about it, it's why we go to movies or watch movies, right? We want to be inspired, right? We want to see regular heroes like us taking these transformational journeys, not just working within our strength zones, but overcoming challenges that just seem impossible, right? And it reminds me too of the Carol Dweck research, right, that we're all really familiar at this point, is that strengths approach carries a bias that maybe talents are innate, and to a large degree they are, but things like singing, you're either born with it or not. But Carol Dweck really popularized a new meaning system that really made me kind of help me rethink the strengths approach. Because Dweck coined the terms fixed mindset and growth mindset. And according to Dweck, right, in a fixed mindset, people believe their basic qualities like intelligences are fixed. They also believe that the talent alone creates success. And in a growth mindset, people believe that their abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, and brains and talents, right? Our talents are just a starting point. So whoops here. So here's a question for you, right? Where is our organizational bias? If we look at the organizations we work in, what is the bias? Everyone should do anything they set their minds to? Or is it more, that messy thing, right? That messy thing, do what we need to do, versus everyone should do what they're really good at. So sometimes the strength message could have an underlying tone to it that color within the lines, do what you're good at, right? Do what's predictable. That's why we gave you the StrengthsFinder. So here's the problem. If we focus too much on what we're good at, right, it can shrink our identity and limit our confidence. It's this question I always love to have: which keyboard are you playing on? And if you think about it, the number of keys on a piano over history kept growing, right? Increasing the number of octaves because composers wanted more opportunities to express themselves. It's kind of an interesting metaphor for us, right? Are we playing on 5 notes, right? And 5 notes over and over again? Or are we expanding, playing on all the notes, right? Venturing out and finding a broader rhythm. We also know that it's not just playing single notes, it's not just our signature strength that breaks through. It's how we integrate our strengths, how we integrate the notes we play to create a harmony that really meets a situation. And we all know that. We all know that in our experiences. It is fun to be in those power zones where we're just clipping along, but then life inevitably throws us a curveball, which we're really not quite ready for. So where should we focus, right? Where should we focus? Well, let me have you throw this in the chat, right? The strengths-based focus. Each person's greatest room for growth is in areas of his or her greatest strength. We know that. And I'm an advocate for that. But the alternative, right, is B. It's the whole person-based approach, which says, well, depending on the circumstances, sometimes our greatest opportunity for growth is in an area that we're not naturally gifted in. So just for fun, where should we focus? There's no right answer here. There's no in between, but what's your bias? Where should we focus? Give me your answers quickly in the chat.
And Mike, when we get all those in, there's a question I'd like to throw out there, if I may.
Sure.
But so far, we're getting a lot of B's come in.
Okay.
I've not seen an A so far. Someone says both. Still more B's. Both again. Again, another both. Oh, we got a sole A in there. Okay.
Yeah, all right.
And again, some boths, B's. So right now, it looks like we've only had one A. Again, we got lots of B's and lots of both. So can I throw in my question here?
Sure.
So, for a long time, right? Not only did we, if we read the strengths work, and whether it's Gallup or Buckingham or Rath, one of the things they said about the areas that we're not strong in, right, is that it takes, or it can take a lot of effort, a lot of time to improve on something that we're just not good at. And so if I were to use my hands to describe that, the kind of effort it takes to get to an area where we're really not strong to at least some level of improvement where we can have a huge impact on our organization and our role is significant. Yet the amount of effort it takes to go from just a high level strength, just for small incremental improvement, like Toyota always advocates, that incremental improvement sort of process can have a huge impact. So a lot of the arguments around the, sort of the early writings around the strengths were, it just takes too much time and work. And yeah, you might get a little bit better at a weakness or something you're not good at, but you'll never be really, really good at it. And the amount of time, even if you were able to get there, would be quite arduous. Whereas if you can just elevate a strength to even a slightly higher level, the organizational and job impact you can have would be tremendous. So how does that play out? I mean, was that wrong back in the day, or?
Well, no, and it's one of those questions, right? You have to, it's like the question I just asked, the A or B. There's obviously a lot of nuance to it.
Right.
It's trying to be provocative, but I'll give you one example. That it's this notion of empathy, which most of us, the research shows, we're losing our capacity. We're in a screen-driven world where we operate at the speed of text. We don't want messy calls. We want to just kind of keep transitioning things. But we're in a world where, and I'll mention this a little bit later in my presentation, but where we all need to be a little bit more empathic. For most people, the research we show, it's just not their strength. It's not their strength. But my point would be, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We all need to get good at that. On the flip side, do I want someone doing my heart surgery who really has no talent in that area, but it aspires to be a heart surgeon? No. But some of the, so we have to look at the, what the world needs now, right? And you imagine the people in like Ukraine right now, it's like, they never thought they'd be making Molotov cocktails, never thought they'd be good at it. It doesn't matter. It's what's needed. So they'll figure a way out. Good question though, Michael.
Hey, no, thanks.
So maybe, here's what I want to be a little bit provocative, but maybe our greatest strengths are not found in a self-report. Because all a self-report does, remember, it tells you what you told it. It's a self-report. It reports back exactly what you said. And if a group of us got together and developed an assessment about being introverted or extroverted, we could do a pretty good job of teasing out questions that would delineate the two. We all know enough about those constructs. And still people kind of go, wow, that kind of nailed me. And it's like, well, yeah, you kind of answered those questions in alignment. But I love this notion, that maybe some of the deeper answers are found on the journey, found in our failures, found in our challenges. So the bigger question sometimes is, what does it mean to truly live a full, meaningful, and authentic life? And here the research is clear. It's really living through, right, this in-betweenness, between the highs and lows, right, that liminal space between losses and triumphs, joy and pain, light and shadow, triumphs and tragedies, accomplishments and adversities. And that's why I asked that question. When I ever ask anybody tell me about, the meaning in your life and how it was created, they always talk about some obstacle that they overcame. And it reminds me of the parenting paradox. Some of you are parents probably, but at least you were part of families. There's nothing more dysfunctional, right, than families, except for maybe teams at work. So here's the parenting paradox. As happiness decreases, meaning increases. And there's a reason for that. Parenthood is emotionally exhausting. We start a family thinking that it will bring us happiness, but parenting is emotionally exhausting, hopelessly challenging, and we are looking, in that process to fill that meaning void. Fill that happiness void, and we do it through meaning. And what you find families do is, even at while at the end of the rope, they're able to find some meaning in the sacrifice that's going on, some of the challenges that just seem overwhelming, and they'll find little things like, well, at least we're together. So the parenting paradox really points to, without meaning, it's almost impossible. And I raised the question around the manager's dilemma. It's the same thing, right? Like the parenting paradox, there's this happiness meaning trade-off. So the manager can, have this process, try to make people happy, right? Whereas probably the bigger impact would be helping them to find meaning in their roles. So if you think about it, trying to help people be happy in their work is answering that old question, how do we improve morale around here? And in the late 90s, that question shifted to how do we fully engage our people? So one from happiness to engagement. And as we know, right, strengths was initially a big part of that answer. Put people in their strength zones, right? Put people in their strength zones. And that's, and I always start there. It's probably the best foundation, the best place to start. But in this complex, right, continuously changing curveball world, the only thing that really can cut through and link us in the most purposeful way is meaning. And here's how some organizations have made this shift, right? It's kind of interesting, but the thought is by making the whole self and meaning central to their engagement process. So trying to broaden the focus of engagement. I'm just going to give you a couple of slides here because some of you might be involved in measuring engagement. I'm just going to flash a couple of these up just to make sure we leave enough time for your Q&A. So I apologize for that, but I'm just going to flash a few of these. And for those of you who have interest, I'm willingness to get on the phone, Zoom, and share more deeply some of the research and support behind this. And particularly, again, if you're in your role, if you're involved in measuring engagement. So the vast majority of organizations have some kind of engagement program. The majority of CEOs are not happy with the overall process. And I won't get into the detail, but it's for a number of reasons, right? It's not often enough. Often the questions make it management's problem. I'm not getting recognized enough. So it kind of puts the burden back on management. But there's a range of reasons why the engagement surveys are just not effective. They're not meeting expectations. And so I've been working with some groups who've been trying to up that game, right? Trying to rethink what that engagement process might look like and expand beyond how do I bring the best self to work and maybe bring the whole self, that messy whole self that may be really truly needed. So the basic formula ends up being what's at the bottom of this page. It's meaning that ends up driving engagement. Meaning drives engagement. What we used to believe is that if we're engaged, somehow we're going to find meaning. If I know what's expected of me and I'm being recognized and have a best friend or whatever, I will start to find meaning. The real research is indicating that it's meaning that needs to precede any kind of engagement. And so here, let me jump to the money slide here. There's 4 core meaning elements that help us translate meaning, right, which seems very conceptual, into real constructs. So there's progress. Meaningful progress is our performance management system. It's how we set goals and manage performance. And it gets to the heart of, am I growing? And so our change management approach, how do we adapt? Because change is now the new normal, right? Am I adapting to this new world that keeps confronting us in our organization? So what we've tried to do is create new templates that move us in this more complex world where we're answering these questions more deliberately and around these 4 sources of meaning. So real quickly, yes, our strengths play a role in answering these questions, but is our inquiry process, how we ask the questions, that brings the whole self to life. And I won't go into detail, but I want to give you a feel for them. We have 24 questions that truly make a difference. But let me give you some examples, where people are asked, the inquiry is, my work makes a difference to the organization, or it feels a little like family, I belong here, or I play a key role in challenging the status quo in my part of the organization. And finally, I seek the necessary feedback to perform my job at the highest levels. So I just pulled out a few of the questions to give you a feel. They're not the traditional, hey, is someone recognizing me? Is someone making my job clear? No, it's, are you seeking the feedback that you need to? So it's starting to shift the accountability so it's balanced. It's trying to empower people to create their own meaning. So I'm not going to jump into this, but I will end with this. Meaningful engagement, this goes to Michael's question, requires empathy. When empathy and compassion are present, meaning flows. It flows. And that's hard to do right in our digital screen-based world. But without it, when it's absent, compassion and empathy, we lose the intelligence of the heart. And so the organizations have embarked on kind of a meaning-centered approach, trying to really shift the focus back to the work, the culture, the performance management system, how we do change. We're seeing great inroads. They're starting to wake up people who've felt like they've been sidelined. And that's why I love this question, right? It's the heart question, which is needed now more than ever in our organizations, in our screen-based organizations. We need it more than ever, even with the risks it carries, right? So Scarecrow says to Tidman in The Wizard of Oz, I think you're wrong to want a heart. It makes most people unhappy. If you only knew it, you were in luck not to have a heart. So he thinks about that for a second and says, I still want one, right? And I think that's the place we are in this world where most of us are not really great at the empathy thing, particularly in a work setting with its fast pace and chaos and complexity, but we need to have one. And I'll leave you with this last slide. It's the ruby red slippers that Glinda tells Dorothy she needs to hang on to. It's her power, it's her strengths. And she says to her, you always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself. And that's why I think too, beyond whatever some assessment gives you, because you only gave it the answers anyway, is you really have to learn it yourself. You have to take the journey, right? And make sure you don't treat it as just, some generic descriptions, but treat it as a special and sacred power, something that's not fully known to you. There's some mystery to it, right? To you and to where that power exists. And ultimately, it's not definable, but continually merging. So I left you a lot there, but for those who really want to explore the engagement thing and get sample surveys and things like that, because it's central to the work, I'm more than happy to dialogue and share that with you.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike. Listen, I know that we've seen some comments come in the chat. I know that this group has some questions, but if I can start with one, it's one of the prerogatives of sort of being a moderator here. When I think of this, all the work around the strengths, it was all about the self, really trying to impact and drive happiness by leveraging my strengths. So if I could find a way to carve out projects or tasks where I was really fully exploiting my strengths, I'm going to feel more engaged. And I can control that, right? If I know what my strengths are, if I'm honest about my strengths, and if I can somehow create work that leverage those strengths, then I'm going to feel, and Buckingham said this, I'm going to feel engaged. I'm going to feel time goes by and I don't even realize I am in my zone, right? When I think of sort of the whole area of meaning, it makes me wonder how much control I have over that. Yeah, I control my strengths, but there seems to be an implicit organizational impact here, where it's at least the organization has some role to either provide meaning for their employees or help them find meaning. So is that am I seeing that conflict or difference in a way that I'm describing it here? Because I can, like I said, I can control my strengths. I can leverage them. I can be aware of them, and I can focus on projects that allow me to use those strengths every day. But I can't necessarily always impact the organization's efforts to demonstrate empathy, to help me find meaning. So help us understand that sort of dilemma, if you would.
Yeah, but if that's our default, I'm just going to stay in my strengths because I can control them.
Right.
It doesn't create that dynamic we really need, where people are kind of saying, well, maybe let me take a little bit of a risk here with this question. This is not my strength, but here's what I'm thinking. And instead of leaving it unsaid, what if we had that safe environment where people could say, this is new to me, but here's where I think might be relevant. And I also believe we are emerging what we think are our non-strengths. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I would not say, here's my strengths, here's how I'm going to leverage them, take it or leave it, or I would have that more expansive view. Here's what we know about the research too. We find people all the time in really terrible environments where they're not well managed and they're not purposeful, where they'll find meaning in the most difficult jobs in the world. They'll find meaning and they'll say, I make a difference. And it's Frankel's contribution to the meaning world. He says, we have a will to meaning. We're going to find it no matter what. There was this famous example where in the 40s, these researchers created this little video, and it was totally random. It had no real message, but had a bunch of figures moving around, squares, triangles, and stuff for a few minutes. And they asked people, what do you see? Is there a story here? And about 95% of the people said yes, even though it was totally random and there was like no animals in it or anything like that. They were reinforcing this notion. We're motivated to find meaning, and even in very difficult environments, we're going to do it. That's why I think that start with your strengths. Absolutely leverage your strengths. I'm a strengths advocate, but what I see what the world needs most of is not saying these are my strengths, but what needs to be done. Here's the question: what needs to be done? And I'm going to try to apply my strengths to that, but I'm still going to get done what needs to be done. If that means making a Molotov cocktail, I'll make a Molotov cocktail. I'm going to try to apply my strengths. I'm glad I know them, and I'm going to try to bring out the strengths in you in that process. But the first question I think it needs to be answered in this world we live in is what needs to be done.
Great. All right,
Michael,
let me open it up. Yes, go ahead, Erwin.
Yeah, building on what the other Mike just talked about.
The good-looking Mike or the less good-looking Mike? Which one?
Either one. But the example is at work. I noted that we had several chefs handling the hamburger part of the cafeteria, and I was watching them over my time working. And there was always this one chef that I ended up getting into some conversations with. This one chef just took some extra steps in how we prepared the hamburgers. He was more methodical about things. You could see he enjoyed his work. The other chefs weren't at all like that. They were just doing a job. And this one was kind of trying to, tell me what you want in a hamburger. And he would customize it very readily. So in my discussions with him, it was, hey, I want to do good work, and I feel proud that I'm doing good work. And he knew he was a better chef than the other people were. And that's one of the ways that he got meaning out of his work. I agree with that. But I also think we as an organization at the Metropolitan Water District have a meaningful organization. And a lot of the work we've done has been to try to infuse an understanding of that meaning to the workforce. Yeah. Not everybody, but we, for example, did company tours. We covered 5,200 square miles. Wow. We did company tours, and then I interviewed a bunch of people when they came back, when we first launched those tours, people would come back who worked in the company 15, 20 years, and they would come back and say to me, wow, I never realized, right? They were all excited by what they saw in the company. Now, I didn't say this to them, but I'm thinking, what the heck have you been doing for the past 15, 20 years? You haven't paid attention.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a lot of the secret, I think, to your question, the other Mike.
Yeah. And when I was your next door neighbor, we had a similar experience at LA Metro. Imagine we had a lot of executives in the organization who've never been on a bus. Right. I mean, they're running the second largest transportation agency in the US and never been on a bus. But all of a sudden you take them out of their luxury cars and you have them ride buses for a day, and they sit next to people who don't have options. They walk away with a different sense of purpose and meaning, if you will, and a deeper appreciation for the work that they do. Other folks, jump in. Please come off mute and throw out your questions for either Mike or Karen.
I'll bite.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you for kind of outlining your philosophy as it relates to engagement and as it relates to different approaches and how we look at this. And one thing that I think a lot about is how any strength over leveraged can become a weakness. The feedback I've often received from some of the people on this call is that my level of adaptability and just generally being amiable leads me to at times speak indirectly. And that's just one example, but I think others can probably think of how their strengths, if over leveraged, can kind of be a weakness. And wanted just to see your thoughts on coaching to help people kind of understand, yes, leverage your strengths, work toward those, but also understand where and have that self-awareness for where that can actually become a bit of a hindrance.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a good one to always start with in terms of our development too. It's what a foundation to know our strengths and to know our areas of weakness. When I first took the MBTI, it did two things for me. One, I thought there was something wrong with me because I came out as a total introvert. I had no extrovert questions on it. So I just thought there was something wrong with me, that I like dogs more than people. And so I did that. And then it also helped me to stop wishing that people would be more like me. I started to see the real advantage of having someone who had strengths in areas where I didn't and how to leverage them. So it just opened up my world, significantly. So I think that's the foundation we build. Know your strengths, know where you need to collaborate, bond with others. But I've seen in this new world we live in too, that the discussion can't stop there. It really needs to move beyond. It's a little more complex. It's like, what does the world need? What does the world need from me now? And yeah, can I use my strengths? Yes. Can I find people who are strong in this area? Yes. But that's simplistic. It's often way more complex than that. When I work with people in really difficult transitions, really difficult challenges, where people are really trying to shift a whole culture, if we stay at that level, go with your strengths and manage around your weaknesses, we'll never get there. We'll get to where we are now, which hasn't been changing. So we'll never solve the diversity and inclusion question until we allow people to bring their whole self to work. So while we're promoting strengths, I always say you got to be really super careful about that, because we shape these secure identities that may not be as expansive as they need to be when the world needs us most. So I like the foundation, but I always say the more interesting question to me is not what are your strengths, but what did you do when they said no? What did you do when they said no to you? Or when you were needed most? What did you do? What did you do?
If we can squeeze in one more question, folks. Want to be mindful of time? And just in case, Mike and Karen, if people want to hang around for at least a little bit more, do you have some time? Great. Any other questions, folks?
Mike, I've got a question.
Sure. Jonathan?
So part of what's intriguing about this is that you applied the strengths approach at an organization, like as an organizational intervention, and it took off like fire. So I'm curious, what are the things that made it take off like fire to tinder, and what caused it to ebb at the point where it had been going, I understand it had been going for a few years, and then it was decided now it's time to close the project. What do we learn from that might potentially be applicable at other organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's a great question. And by the way, the guy who, trying to think of his name, it escapes me, but the guy who initiated this whole notion of engagement, his first conversation with people was, and it threw him off. He goes, what do you really like about your work? No one had ever been asked that. It was in the 70s. It was Kant. So no one had ever been asked that. So they didn't know how to respond. And he goes, it was kind of amazing because they thought, well, I like this and that. So obviously when the strengths movement occurred, it reawoke, right? Just some of these dormant ideas that we just didn't think about it. So it was really powerful, catalytic. But we've entered a new era, and I think that's what we all have to kind of recognize. It's kind of like being over-surveyed as a consumer. It's like or being over-surveyed in general, you stop listening to the question. So you have to change the inquiry process. So instead of saying, what are your strengths? That's question is, it's done. It's done. It's great. You can start with people who are just learning about their strengths in high school. That's relevant. But for the rest of it, it's like, how you start shifting that. It's like, how have you lifted up someone else's strengths today? Go for a more challenging question. So we have to keep evolving our engagement process. And for sure, the initial engagement programming was really about, it put another burden on management to make people happy. And now they're shifting that to, no, we all need to kind of share in this. We need to share in trying to create this meaningful organization. So I think part of it is any tool that's been used for too long has probably been overused. Any approach that's been used for too long is probably not adapted to these new realities. And I know that that's the world you all live in organizational development and such, that it's really trying to make sure the inquiry process is asking the right questions that really stimulate that kind of growth that we really need in this world we live in now.
So what I hear you saying is strengths was great for that moment in time. And then the next thing that would contribute to the organization either getting to the next level or dealing with the next challenge.
And again, if I was starting with a group of junior high students, I'd start, let's talk about your strengths. Let's get really excited about what's unique about you. I would definitely build that foundation.
Yes.
What's strong about your buddy? And, but then, for those of us who are working in organizations, if our practice is built around strengths, we're behind. We're hopelessly behind because we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and we're, and that's not about strengths, right? In that sense, it's really about bringing the whole person to work and making it really safe to do that. If we could solve that challenge, right, that would be a good one.
Thank you.
Well, folks, I want to take the liberty to go ahead and sort of formally close, but invite both Mike and Karen, if they can stay a bit, and anyone else who'd care to stay, to stick around and have a little bit more discussion. But, on behalf of the planning team, thanks, Mike and Karen, for being available. We talked about this back in October, I think it was, Karen, the first time, and I'm so delighted we were able to pull this off. It's great to see the both of you together after a very, very long time. And to see, and also to thank Sherry for driving behind the scenes and helping out with all the logistics. So
speaking of logistics, Mike, can I stop you for just a moment?
Yeah, please.
Two things I want to share before we lose people.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm going to drop some links in the chat.
Great.
one is going to be a post event survey, just to hear
Perfect.
what you liked about it. And then also we have our April meeting, which is our wellness part 2. If you were there for the first one in January, this is the second half of that. And that will be in April. I'm going to drop the link in the chat for both of them.
Wonderful. Please do sign up.
Okay,
Please do
thank
sign up.
you.
So thanks, folks. And if you need to sign off, fully understand. Great. Thanks for joining. But if you have more questions, please jump in there and fire away.
And thank you, everybody.